Welcome to this event in the 2020 Portobello Book Festival. My name is May Shaw and I'm a member of the organising group. The festival is organised annually by a local group of enthusiastic readers and writers in conjunction with and in support of the local public library. Books featured can be found at the Portobello Bookshop. I would like to thank today's contributors for their willingness to participate in this reconfigured festival. Thank you for joining us and we hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the captivating crime event, Portobello Book Festival, where today I'm talking with authors Jackie Baldwin and Olga Wojtas. Jackie was a criminal and family law lawyer for 20 years before retraining as a hypnotherapist. She's written 3 novels featuring Detective Inspector Frank Farrell, who is a former Roman Catholic priest. They are Dead Man's Prayer, Perfect Dead, and more recently, Avenge the Dead. Olga was a journalist for more than 30 years and is Edinburgh born and bred. She attended James Gillespie's high school, which was the inspiration for the Marcia Blaine School for girls, made famous by Muriel Spark, of course, in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie. This has in turn inspired Olga's own books about librarian Shona McMonigal. Did I say that properly, Olga? Did I get her name
Perfect.
right? Shona.
People keep calling her Shona McGonigal, but it is McMonigal, yes.
Well, it is a bit tempting, isn't it? So those 2 books are Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Golden Samovar, and earlier on this year, Miss Blaine's Prefect and the Vampire Menace. She also writes a series of cosy crime e-novellas, and we'll hear more about that later on. So thank you both for joining me today. I want to start by asking you, just generally, can you tell me about your books? Tell me what they're about. So Jackie, if you could tell me first of all.
Okay, they're basically police procedurals set in southwest Scotland in Dumfries, and they feature a team of 5 led by DI Frank Farrell. I suppose you could say they're neither hugely graphic or gritty because I'm a bit squeamish myself, and neither are they cosy. I think the word that probably best describes them that people have fed back to me is they're intense. The first book is set in Dumfries and involves the murder of a priest and the abduction of twin boys. The second book is set in the artist town of Kirkcudbright and is set in the art world and a sinister collective. And the third book is set in Dumfries at the Sheriff Court and is a plot involving the criminal bar there.
Okay, and Olga, what about yours?
Well, I feel there's not enough crime novels that feature middle-aged women as the protagonists, so I'm reclaiming that. Basically, my heroine is a librarian in Morningside Library. She's 50-something, or rather she admits to 50-something, but I think she's pretty close to getting her bus pass. But she has had the finest education in the world, having gone to Marcia Blaine School. She can also do martial arts, she speaks languages, she's just absolutely fantastic. And what's even better is she is by no means sylph-like. And she gets sent by Miss Blaine herself on time-traveling missions. I feel she's a bit like a Labrador. She's very bouncy, she's very can-do, and she's actually quite thick. And she tends not to realise what it is she's supposed to be doing. She tends to mess up her missions quite a lot, but she has no idea, and she just keeps going, and it always works out in the end.
I think it's fair to say that neither of you have conventional detectives. I suppose yours, Jackie, are a bit more conventional. And Olga, I'm not sure if Shona would think of herself as a detective, but there's definitely a crime element in there in various places. So we've got a time-traveling librarian and we've got an ex-priest. So they're definitely not your average ordinary police procedural type books. They're both, I think, for me, the main characters are what made them both really fascinating books to read. I say both, I mean all the books that you've read. Don't mean I've only read one each. So what I'd like to do now is invite you both to do a reading from your books, so I can get a flavour of your characters and your style of writing. So Jackie, could I ask you to go first? Is this going to be from the latest book?
Yes, it's from the edited prologue of Avenge the Dead, and it's set 10 years before the main action opens.
Okay, thank you. And you go then.
Colette flopped back on the pillows. the enormity of what she had just done creeping in around the edges of her intoxication. She could hear them laughing and joking, stumbling around the tiny cottage on drunken legs as they gathered up their stuff. There was a light tap on the door. "Come in," she yelled. He stood framed in the doorway. "Are you sure you're okay? I can stay if you want, keep you company." Her expression softened. As the effects of the alcohol started to wear off, she felt a rush of blood to her head. What on earth had she been thinking? How would she face them all in court tomorrow? She heard his name being called. If she didn't get rid of him, the others would come clattering in, and that was the last thing she wanted. "Honestly, I'm fine. Best if you head back with the others. I need to get some sleep. We've got court in the morning." The sound of slurred voices gradually receded down the country lane. She padded down to the kitchen and filled a pint glass with water. Now that the effects of the alcohol and ecstasy were wearing off, her teeth began to chatter. Fortunately, the log fire lit without protest. It had been a long, boring 2 weeks in Jedburgh, with each of them acting for one accused. They had all decided to blow off steam. Already the night's events were starting to disperse from her memory like wisps of smoke. What if they talked and word got back to him? She shuddered. Too late for regrets. The doorbell rang. She rolled her eyes. What now? Making her way to the door, she flung it wide, expecting to see her friends. Her eyes widened in horror as she was grabbed by the throat and pushed back into the house by the masked intruder. Terrified, she realised that he was holding a hunting knife. The tip pressed into her neck, and she could feel the heat of it as it pierced her skin. Still, he said nothing. The knife pressed deeper. She felt an itch as the warm blood trickled down her neck. Adrenaline flooded her system as she weighed her options. It forced her into the lounge, still at knife point, and backed her up to the couch, which was piled high with blankets. "Colette," a voice slurred. "What's going on?" The blanket slid off to reveal one of her friends, still drunk and with an expression of confusion and burgeoning fear on his face. He lurched to his feet. Colette sagged in relief. Thank God, everything would be all right now. There were two of them. "Phone," hissed the man, "or I'll slit her throat and then yours. Leave now and keep your mouth shut or die here." Colette saw her friend frown, swaying from side to side. She held her breath. All he had to do was lunge at her attacker, dial 999, anything. What was he waiting for? Hot tears wet her cheeks as she watched him throw down his phone. "Tell anyone and I'll hunt you down and kill you," her attacker snarled. Unable to look her in the eye, the man she had called a friend ran past her. She heard the door slam. Maybe he's gone to get help, she thought, her mind reeling at his betrayal. But Jedburgh was 2 miles away. With a surge of rage, she twisted and kneed her attacker in the groin. His grip loosened for a second, but then he roughly threw her onto the couch, pinning her down. All she could see were his pitiless blue eyes boring into her. Screaming obscenities, she clawed at the rough wool balaclava, determined to see his face. His fist connected with the side of her head, but she managed to pull the balaclava half off. She froze in shock. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. "Now you have to die." The next punch he landed knocked her unconscious. She awoke confused and disoriented. All around her flames leapt and the acrid smell of smoke burned her lungs. The house was on fire. She had to get out. She crawled to the front door and fumbled with the handle, realizing to her horror it was locked and there was no sign of a key. She ran to the window and swung a nearby vase at it. The vase broke, but the window didn't. She knew then that she was doomed to die here, in this fiery coffin.
Well, that's certainly a dramatic start to the book, isn't it? I'm sure anyone reading that or anyone who's listening today is now going to be desperate to know what happens next. So that was great. Thanks for that, Jackie. And Olga, would you like to read us a bit from one of your books? Again, is this from the most recent? Is this the Vampire Menace one?
This is from the most recent. It's the Vampire Menace. And just to explain, Shona has turned up in a small village in France in the year 1900. She has time travelled there. She doesn't know why she's there. doesn't know what's going on, and she has found this thing that she doesn't know what to call it. She doesn't know whether it's a cafe or a bistro or an estaminet, so she's decided to call it a house, because it's got blokes in it who are drinking and smoking, and these turn out to be the village worthies. So there has been this sort of collective gasp from the men, and she has turned to look in the doorway, and this is where it starts. I turned to see a young woman silhouetted against the dusk outside. Her figure was what one describes as hourglass, with a tiny cinched-in waist. She wore a thin cotton dress which reached just below her calves, the backlight turning her into that image of Princess Diana displaying her spectacularly long legs. The dress had a V-neck, and the gold crucifix she was wearing round her neck drew attention to her impressive décolletage. She wore a headscarf, but it was arranged in such a way that stray curls enhanced her fine bone structure. She obviously cared a lot about her appearance. She was, in short, the sort of woman I find it a challenge to like on sight. She waited for her eyes to adjust to the house darkness, and when they had, she marched straight up to the tall, bewhiskered police officer. "Is there any news?" she demanded. The officer took a step back. "News?" he stuttered. "What sort of news?" She looked as though she was about to punch him, and he took another step back, colliding with the table and sending it clattering across the floorboards. I began to think very slightly better of her. "You know what news," she snapped. "News of my husband, my beloved Sylvain. Have you found him?" The middle-aged, distinguished undertaker and cheesemonger came up to her and took her gently by the arm. "You know where he is," he said, his voice soothing. "He's dead and buried in the graveyard. You know that, Madeleine. You were at the funeral." Impatiently, she shook her arm free. "Oh yes, I was at the funeral, but my husband wasn't, since he's not dead." "I can assure you he is," said the undertaker and cheesemonger. "You know why we couldn't let you see the body. It would have been too dreadful for you. But he is in his grave." "He is not dead," said Madeleine distinctly. "You fools, don't talk to me about bodies and graves. If he were dead, I would feel it here." She clasped her hands to her bosom in such a way as to give it quite a lot of uplift. There was another collective sigh from the men. The mayor stepped forward. "Madeleine, you're in the middle of the grieving process. It's a difficult time. We all understand that. You need something to occupy you. I have the very thing. Madame MacMonagall." "What?" she said impatiently. "MacMonagall? What sort of a name is that?" "Mine," I said. "Don't wear it out."
Thank you very much. And another very intriguing reading there. And I think people will get an idea, Olga, that when they read your novel, they're also in for quite a few laughs, because there's a lot of very funny moments provided by Shona and many misunderstandings in those books. So the books that both of you have written are part of a series. And I just wondered, when you started writing your first one, did you know you were going to be writing a series? Did you have it all planned out? Or was it a bit of a surprise to you when you thought, I need to take these characters more? You know, what was the thinking when you started, and where do you see the series going? Jackie, if you could tell me first of all.
I think I wrote the first book over 10 years, and at first you really just start writing something for yourself. And so I don't think at that very beginning stage I envisaged it being a series, because I didn't envisage it getting published at all in many respects. But it was a police procedural, and series are more common, although you can get standalones. And then, you know, I wanted to continue Frank's journey. So, you know, when I was asked for another plot, you know, it just by the publisher, it just continued from there, really. But in the first book, I definitely didn't think that far ahead, I suppose you would say.
Mm-hmm. And then when you were writing the second, did you think, okay, there's more to
Yes.
tell about this character, or?
Oh yeah, oh yes, definitely. Especially given the events in the second, the
Ended
book
quite
ends in
dramatically,
quite a
didn't
traumatic.
it?
Yes, quite traumatically for the characters, due to something that happens to one of their own. So obviously, it wasn't possible to conclude that story in the second book. So that was the obvious jumping off point for the third book. Because also, you know, police officers in my books, like in the real world, are real people, and they're not immune from being affected from what's happened to them in the course of their employment. So I very much want to show that people's characters, you know, ebb and flow according to what happens to them, and they're not. I like to show them as real people with, you know, and like everybody else, sometimes you have to grit your teeth to keep going in adverse circumstances.
Yeah. So there's been 3 Frank Farrell books. Will there be any more?
Not sure at the moment. Basically, with the third one, I feel that I left it in such a way that I could continue, or I could. But I also, for fans of the series, I actually I feel left sufficient hints that if they wanted closure, they could also take closure from it. So it was quite a balancing act at the end of that novel. But you know, that was very, because as a reader myself, I get very involved in the books that I read, and I would hate to be left high and dry. Personally speaking, I like to feel I can have closure, because to me the characters are real people when I'm a reader. So I feel I've put that in it that people can take from it if they wish, but I've also left it open for more novels in the future. But at the moment, I'm working on something new.
Oh, we'll hear more about that later on. I was having a look at some of the reviews of the various books, Jackie, and there's quite a few people who've said, can't wait for the 4th one, look forward to seeing what happens next. So you might be under a little bit pressure to give us a bit more of Frank Farrell at some point in the future. So
Yes,
definitely don't tuck him away just yet. and Olga, basically the same question for you then. You know, when you started first writing about Shona, and I'm really intrigued as to, you know, where the idea from Shona came from for a start. But did you think, oh, I've got lots of stories here, or was it just like Jackie was saying, you wrote one and then felt there was more in it?
I go along with everything that Jackie said, because all I was doing was seeing whether I could write a novel. This was my first. And, you know, I'd only written short stories before, and I didn't know whether I could sustain something. So, as I say, it was just to see whether it could be done. So I had no concept of it being published, let alone continuing. And I was so grateful. It's published by Contraband, which is the crime and mystery imprint of Saraband, the publishers. And I was just so thrilled when they took it on. And again, I wasn't even thinking beyond that. And it was the publisher themselves who suggested there might be more mileage in it. I hadn't been thinking in those terms. But the way it came about was I studied Russian when I was at school, and that's why I set it in Imperial Russia. There's a sort of riff on Tolstoy in it. There's various things that come from Tolstoy, like there's a grand ball scene, and there's a duel in the forest, and of course there's a train because of Anna Karenina. But that was the impetus, if you like. So I wasn't thinking of other settings. And then when the publisher said, you know, there could be another one, I was thinking, good grief, that's me out of ideas. I don't know where she can go next. And then realized that because she's a time traveler, she can go anywhere, anytime. And the inspiration for the second one was I spent a year working in France as an assistant in a school. I was teaching English in a school. And in order to work in France, you had to get a residence permit and a work permit, but you couldn't get a residence permit until you got the work permit, and you couldn't get the work permit until you got the residence permit. So this went on. I kept going backwards and forwards to the police station, who were the people who organised it, and eventually it all worked out, and they were filling in the form, and I gave them my address, and they wrote down Angleterre. And I'm thinking, no, I don't come from Angleterre. So I said, no, I said it's Écosse, not Angleterre. They said, no, it's Angleterre. And I said, no, it's not. And we had a bit of a stooshy about it. And eventually they wrote down Écosse on my residence permit and my work permit, but they put it in inverted commas, as if I just made up this word that nobody had ever heard of. And I was all full of, France and the Old Alliance and so on. It turns out nobody in France has heard of the Old Alliance or knows anything about Scotland. So that was, there's various running gags. In the first book, the running gag was that she didn't know what year it was, and she thought it was unprofessional to ask, so she tried to work it out. In this one, it's that nobody has ever heard of Scotland, and they keep saying she's English and she comes from England, and she has to keep telling them she's not.
Yeah, I never did quite work out what year she was in the first book. I know you said there's clues, but they were obviously too clever for me. So just thinking about your main characters then, as I said earlier, they're not the most conventional characters in a crime novel. So we've got Frank, who's an ex-priest, and we've got Shona, who's a librarian, a time-travelling librarian, no less. So where did the idea for having those as your main characters come from? I mean, Frank in particular, he's got a lot of, I don't know, shall we call it baggage from his previous life as a priest, which really impacts on his decisions in his current work. So where did the idea for Frank come from? Why did you want to have a former priest, Jackie?
When I first conceived of this novel, I was working in a demanding job and I had young children. So I thought, what do I know about? And the answer was crime and Catholics, because I'd gone to the local convent school, which was run by Benedictine nuns. And back then, Catholic education, the nuns were lovely, but back then, Catholic education was quite graphic. When you were young, at an impressionable age, it was all about saints being ripped apart and all this angst and violent imagery to some extent. And I think the priest would come into the school and, it was a kind of Jesuit type priest with the long swishing robes, and they were very other, and I was quite interested because Catholic priests are very set apart, unlike priests in, other religions that can get married, be part of the community, have a more normal life. Priests, had this whole aura of, I suppose, loneliness and, remoteness about them. And I suppose I thought psychologically that would be something interesting to explore, this whole idea of, the guilt that, can, and I suppose the constant angst in a way that accompanies such a role. So he's been a Roman Catholic, a practicing Roman Catholic priest, and then he had a nervous breakdown resulting from traumatic events that occurred, and therefore, he managed to get stitched back together again and rejoined and joined the police, which I suppose you could argue is fighting evil on a secular plane rather than a spiritual one. Yeah. So that was really the inspiration, and I just found that piercing kind of loneliness and a bit set apart. He's still got a bit of that with him, even though he's now in the real world, but he's still technically a priest. He's not undergone laicization yet, so he's still a little ambivalent, and his faith waxes and wanes, as events occur, and there is quite a lot of inner conflict arising from that. So I just thought it'd be interesting to explore.
Yeah, he's certainly a very interesting character, and as you say, that conflict between what is the best way for him to do the best, to fight the evil, to work for the good, in the two different ways that he has done it. He makes for a really interesting read. And Olga, tell us about Shona, and tell us about Shona and Miss Jean Brodie, please.
Well, I can tell you that I went to Gillespie's, and as you said, it was the school that inspired Muriel Spark, who also went to Gillespie's, to write the Marcia Blaine School. And the school at that point was absolutely horrified. They thought that Muriel Spark had brought the school into disrepute. because obviously Jean Brodie is having affairs and, you know, there's fearful things going on. And it was very, very obvious that it was Gillespie's because she based it on her primary school teacher. Jean Brodie was based on a teacher called Christina Kay, who Muriel Spark actually said was a character in search of an author. So there was no doubt about it. The school, as I say, was just absolutely shocked. So I like the idea of this former pupil of Marcia Blaine, who was really aggrieved about Muriel Spark writing this book. And then I thought, well, what's better than to put her in the library where she spends her time trying to stop people reading The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie because it's brought her school into disrepute. But as with Jackie, I started writing this a while back. And as a journalist, I'm a complete news junkie. I still buy newspapers, I watch all the news bulletins, and I was getting really stressed and really upset by it all because it was just all dreadful. Having said that, I didn't realize how bad it was going to get.
Well,
I mean,
yes.
this was pre-C19. Anyway, what I found was when I was reading books, particularly crime and thrillers, I was getting agitated because terrible things would happen to them, like the beginning of Jackie's book that she read, and I would be getting all upset. Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to write was something that was just a romp where you were not going to get upset because you knew it was all going to work out. It would all be fine, you know, don't worry about it. So there's Shona, who is getting into the most terrible messes, and the reader can see what's going on, but Shona just sails through regardless. Nothing ever upsets her. She just gets on with whatever has to be done. So it was supposed to be a sort of antidote to stress. And, you know, as you know, in normal books, the character goes on a journey, you know, whether it's metaphorical or real, they have changed by the end. Well, Shona doesn't change at all. She's as big a numpty at the end as she was at the beginning. And I see it a bit like P.G. Wodehouse. When you get Jeeves and Wooster, their characters do not change by the end. And Bertie gets into terrible scrapes and has to be rescued by Jeeves. But you know it's all going to be fine. Nothing terrible is going to happen. So it was the comic element rather than the crime element that was pushing me forward.
Yeah. So I should say you don't have that feeling about Miss Jean Brodie, do you? You like Muriel Spark.
I am. These here are the Polygon edition of Muriel Spark that were brought out in 2018 for her centenary, and I love Muriel Spark and the number of people that come up to me and say, "So you don't like The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie?" And you keep saying a character is different from an author. It's not the same thing.
I think there's definitely a bit of Miss Jean Brodie in Shona, although I'm sure she wouldn't thank me for saying that.
Exactly, you're right, you're right.
So, what else? I was going to ask about the research that you do for your books, because as we've already established, they're quite different. They've got very different characters. Jackie's are set in contemporary times, and Olga, yours are a bit in contemporary times, but there's also the historical element to them. So I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about how you go about your research, Jackie.
I think mine don't require anything like the amount of research that Olga's will, and I think that was part of how I started writing crime novels in the first place, because having been a criminal defence solicitor, I was fairly steeped in that environment. You know, I know what it's like to go to the police station, to be in the custody cells, all these different things, you know, just as part of the fabric of my experience. So the actual aspects of police procedure, I didn't require that much research because I already was fairly current with that. Although I did get a bit of a curveball. I'd finished my first novel when, to my horror, Police Scotland upended everything. So I was tearing my hair out, you know, I was having a complete tantrum when this happened, thinking, oh no, I'll have to throw my book away, what am I going to do? So I ended up setting it and cheating a little and setting it in 2012, the first one, just before, and then the second book, I also went out, and that was just before Police Scotland came into operation, so it was still all the old procedures. But for the third novel, I just had to grit my teeth and embrace it. So I had to do a little more research with that, you know, just to see what the new system was like. and therefore my characters are actually living in Glasgow and having to come back to Dumfries to do an investigation to be consistent with the conventions of police procedural novels and be fairly accurate. I'm not someone that dots the I's and crosses the T's, but I certainly like to keep it loosely correct in what I'm doing. So.
Yeah, I heard a lot of crime authors at the time when Police Scotland were formed had exactly the same kind of thing. Do we have to rewrite, or do we just put that one out and then carry on for the next one? Because it was such a massive change in the whole police organisation and structure, wasn't it? Quite a challenge for you. And Olga, what about you? So you said that you were in France, and obviously your interactions with the French authorities there must have informed things, and you studied Russian, but how do you go about all the research for what actually happens when Shona's on her travels?
Well, with the first one, I started doing a lot of research. I did a bit of rereading of Tolstoy, and then I was reading Russian history books, and I was filling notebook after notebook full of notes and so on. And then I realized all I was doing was trying to shoehorn in bits of information to show I've done my research, and it was just dreary. There was absolutely no point to it. So I basically chucked away all the notebooks and just did things that had struck me, things that had sort of stayed in my brain because they were weird. And what I like doing in both of them, I have some things that are true and some things that are completely made up. And I like to think that readers may not know the difference between them. For example, in the Russian one, I've got a reference to this sect called the Skotsi, and they did actually exist. They were this very weird religious sect, and they believed that relations, they were mixed, but they believed that relations between men and women were inappropriate. So what they used to do was they used to sort of lop bits off themselves to make them sort of horrible to the opposite sex. And that's just weird. So as I say, I've got a reference to that, and it sounds like the sort of thing somebody's just made up, but no, they were like that. Yes. And in the second one, I've got a sort of, I lived in Aberdeen for quite a long time, so I've got a sort of northeast riff that comes into it, because that, spoiler alert, that's where Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, was in Aberdeenshire. And Aberdeen had this very famous opera singer who now is not so well known, called Mary Garden. And I wanted to get her in, and she was actually Debussy's muse. He actually wrote an opera for her. So that was all true. And then I started investigating Debussy, and Debussy was a lad. He got around. But the thing was that women of all ages fancied him. I mean, women were just throwing themselves at him because they thought he was fabulous. So that, again, gave me something to work on. And that is all absolutely true. There was an incredible bit where his wife got fed up because he'd wandered off with somebody else. And his wife went off to the Place de la Concorde and she shot herself. Except she didn't actually manage to kill herself. She just shot herself, and they never got the bullet out. And she existed for the rest of her life with this bullet in her. And frankly, I thought she should have shot Debussy.
Well, sounds like that's a challenge for your readers then. So see if you can spot the bits which are real and the bits which aren't. So I wanted to ask you both about the past few months. So ordinarily we would have been sitting probably in Portobello Library with an audience in front of us, but as we know, that's just not possible. And I just wondered how lockdown and the past few months have affected your writing. Has it made you have more time? Has it just been too stressful to make you concentrate, or has it not really made any difference? So Olga, what about you?
Well, what's paradoxical is when we had lockdown, when we had lockdown to begin with, it made no difference to me at all because I worked from home anyway. So that was just exactly the same. And I was completely freaking out. It was the time when you were only supposed to go out once a day. And I was getting absolutely stir crazy. And, as I say, nothing had actually changed in terms of where I was and what I was doing. And I found it incredibly stressful, really difficult, and my brain just turned to porridge, which is just so odd because, as I say, nothing about my circumstances had changed.
a sort of psychological thing. You had all this time, but well, of course, it was been so stressful with nobody knowing how it was going to affect everybody, what was going to happen. So I suppose that makes absolute sense, even though you're normally working at home, which was a new experience for lots of people.
Yes.
And what about you, Jackie? Find.
Well, at the very start of lockdown was when my third novel came out, and so literally every single thing was just suddenly cancelled. And I suppose I just sort of, oh well, that's it. And sort of, I had this feeling a bit of giving up a bit and just retreating from it all, because I'm a bit of a technophobe, and other more adaptable, versatile writers were just all going online. And I developed a very inconvenient, I would say, it actually was behaving like a phobia, and I just couldn't countenance doing it. But then as time went on, I thought, I've just got to get a grip and get over this. So I'm now on my way to doing that. But as far as the writing is concerned, yes, like Olga says, lots of time, but I am sort of picking up the pace now. But for the first few months, it was like I had a nest of bees in my head. I was doing what a lot of people do, constantly refreshing the news, and I couldn't focus. I had the time, but I just made procrastination an art form. So it did actually take me probably about three months or 4 months to even just, I suppose, get over that and really feel like I was pushing through again and get the focus and concentration back to progress my next book, really.
And I think that leads on nicely to what's going to be my last question for both of you, which is, to tell us about what's happening now. Is there a new book in progress? Olga, I know I mentioned at the beginning you have a bit of an alter ego because you write under a different name as well. So could you perhaps tell us about that? And then if there's any further adventures planned for Shona?
Indeed, yes, I have a secret life. I write these e-novellas which are set in the Cotswolds. Now, I have never knowingly seen a Cotswold, but I have seen Midsummer Murders, so that's where all my information comes from. Yes, and with that, it's very English and Cotswoldsy, so I thought my foreign name was no good for that, so I thought I needed a different name. So my middle name is Helena, and I grew up in Marchmont Road, so I'm Helena Marchmont, who I think sounds fearfully posh.
Oh, she does,
and
yes.
The protagonist in this is a guy called Alfie McAllister, who has had a tragedy in his life and has found that he's inherited a cottage from his aunt in this small village. And he meets his late aunt's two elderly friends, and the three of them sort of become amateur sleuths together and go around solving murders and crimes and so on. So I have just finished writing the 10th and just started writing the 11th. And with Shona, the idea for Shona 3 is marinating away in the background, and I hope she will be allowed to ride again.
And do we know where she's going, or is it all top secret just now?
Well, I do know where she's going, but I think I'll not say anything for the moment.
That's fine, fair enough. And what about you, Jackie? You said that for the moment there's no Frank Farrell, so tell us what you're working on.
I'm working on a new PI novel set in Portobello.
Oh, lovely. Good place.
Yes. And basically, she, her office is on the promenade, and she's the main character is Grace McKenna, who was formerly in the police, but she is now a PI, and she's struggling a bit with the loss of a child who was drowned at the age of 15, suspected of taking his own life. So she's got all that fallout still to deal with, and she's decided that this will be her new start. But she does have, she's another character that's got quite a bit of personal angst behind her. For example, she swims every morning in the sea at Portobello, which is where her son lost his life, and it's her way of feeling close to him. and sometimes she's tempted to keep swimming, but she always, you know, turns back. So yeah, so that's her. But other than that, it's, you know, there's a plot, etc., going on obviously as well. So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Certainly, swimming in the sea at Portobello has become even more popular, I think, over the past few
Yes,
months with the
yeah.
swimming pool being closed. I can quite often see them from my living room window, but I'm afraid that's as close as I get. I'm always very impressed. So that sounds like we've got plenty to look forward to from both of you, so that's great. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. I've thoroughly enjoyed finding out more about your books and having a bit of a blether with you. If you would like to buy books from either Jackie or Olga, or any of the authors who are taking part in the book festival this weekend, they'll be available to order from our local bookshop, the Portobello Bookshop. So either pop along to the shop if you're nearby, or you can have a look on their website. The Portobello Book Festival continues all weekend on our website, and you can also catch up there with any events that you might have missed.